All right, welcome everyone to this overview of Lindamood-Bell's submission of the Seeing Stars program to the Virginia Department of Education. We're going to walk through an overview of the big picture of the program and how it's designed. Then we'll go through the specific materials that you'll have access to and be able to look at. And then we'll walk quickly through a lesson plan to show you how it is that those materials are utilized in real time. My name is Dave Kivita. I'm Director of Development for Lindamood-Bell for Schools, and I'm joined by my colleague, Tracy Hall. Tracy, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Dave. Thank you so much. My name is Tracy Hall, and I am Professional Development Presenter for Lindamood-Bell, doing both virtual and in-person workshops and training teachers utilizing these programs.
Great. Great to have you with us, Tracy. So we're excited to walk through and discuss the genesis of the program first and give you the big picture of it. And really, these programs were formed out of years of working with students. Lindamood-Bell has been around for over 30 years. And discovering what really was the primary cause of reading struggles has been an ongoing process that has involved extensive research at universities such as Georgetown, Wake Forest, MIT, University of Washington, and elsewhere. And through that research and through the work that we've been doing, we know that the brain can only process sensory information. And so the primary cause of reading difficulties really lies at the sensory level. Some individuals have real strengths in sensory processing, and some do not. And weakness in those specific sensory cognitive functions really is the primary cause of those reading struggles. And so our goal is to identify where the weaknesses for a student lie, and then give explicit, differentiated instruction to the student based on those weaknesses so that we can turn them into strengths, and we can end up with an independent learner who's ready to go out and tackle reading. So sensory cognitive functions really are the foundation of language and literacy skills. And there are three primary sensory cognitive functions that we focus in on at Lindamood-Bell. And those are phonemic awareness, which everybody's very familiar with at this point, the ability to locate sounds within words. Then what's called symbol imagery, which is the ability to create mental imagery for sounds and letters within words. A lot of folks think about symbol imagery as orthographic mapping. We like to think about symbol imagery as being the specific skill that underlies students' ability to orthographically map sounds and letters together. And then what's called concept imagery. Concept imagery being the ability to create an image gestalt or whole for oral and written language. I often talk about it as the ability to make a movie in your mind for language as it's coming in, whether you're reading it off the page or hearing it. And sometimes it's helpful to think about a keyword. If we think about a word like cat, right? For phonemic awareness, in order to read a paragraph about cat, if a student doesn't recognize the word cat right away, they have to be able to sound it out by using their ability to locate that A says ah in a word and be able to sound that out. And if it's a U instead, that word would say cut. In terms of their symbol imagery, they've got to be able to picture that a cat is spelled C-A-T and not K-A-T, even though phonetically it could say that. And then concept imagery for the word cat is simply, it's a small furry animal with pointy ears and a long tail, right? And those are three very distinct brain functions, even though they come from a very simple word. And a weakness in any one of those cognitive functions causes a weakness in a student's ability to read that passage and derive meaning from it. And at Lindamood-Bell, what we're focused on is what's called process-based education. Process-based education focuses on teaching to the underlying sensory cognitive weaknesses to students so that we can build them into a strength, and then students can get back to accessing content-based education. And so weak language and literacy skills really is the reason why students aren't able to progress in terms of making a year's worth of gain for every year that they're in school. And it's important that as students are getting into intervention, that we're not simply helping them access the content, but that instead we really are driving at those underlying processes so that they can become an independent learner, right? And we think about the integration of these different processes of reading when we think about this Venn diagram. It talks about these different parts of reading. And I know that I've seen representations of this Venn diagram. We've been talking about this Venn diagram for over 30 years, since Pat Lindamood and Nancy Bell first founded the company. And more recently, I've seen a Venn diagram just like this coming out of letters training. So I know that this idea of this integration of processes has really taken off, which is great. Students do need to be recognized as taking a look at their data and determining where are their strengths and weaknesses in the process of reading. Are they struggling with phonological processing, which is underlying good word attack skills? Or is it more about their orthographic processing, which needs to be developed in order to help with their word recognition? Is it that the student has a difficulty with vocabulary? All of those individual pieces fold into the whole point of reading, which is comprehension, right? And that a student who's in need of intervention is in need of intervention because they've got a weakness in one of those sensory cognitive processes that we want to make sure that we're developing. And there are certainly students that we see who are strong in all of these individual parts of reading, but still struggle with comprehension overall, right? And we think about that as the reading process as being about not just decoding, but also comprehension, right? That those two pieces have to go together. Important to know is that both Seeing Stars and the Visualizing and Verbalizing program are based on a theory of cognition. It's called the dual coding theory, which a gentleman named Alan Pavio, who was a cognitive psychologist in Canada, really researched years ago. And he talks about how cognition, our ability to understand something, is about an interplay between the verbal and the nonverbal. That I can understand what Tracy is talking about to the extent that her words come in and create a picture in my mind. And I can help Tracy understand what I'm talking about to the extent that I can take those pictures, those things I'm seeing in my mind, and use my words to give those back to Tracy so she can see that same picture. And dual coding theory really is one of the strongest candidates for a unified, scientifically based theory of literacy that accounts for all of the aspects of reading under a common set of principles. And it's been very widely discussed and researched. And so we know that imagery as a whole is a primary sensory cognitive function and critical to the imagery language foundation. But there isn't just one type of imagery. In fact, there are two types. There's imagery for parts and there's imagery for wholes. The Seeing Stars program that we're going to talk about today is about developing student symbol imagery. So that imagery for sounds and letters within words, so that I could take a word like short, and Tracy, if I said erase the SH and put an F there, and what would that word say?
And that would say fort.
Fort. Excellent, right? I don't have to show it to her. I can just tell her what letters to picture changing, and she can make that change right away. Concept imagery, different from that, is again to be able to create that movie in your mind or that picture in your mind. If you think back to that example of using a cat, what color cat are you picturing, Tracy?
I'm picturing a black cat with white socks.
Great. And you might be picturing a brown cat or a tawny cat, all kinds of different cats, right? But there are certain components to that you have to be able to picture in order to make sense from a story. So symbol imagery is a sensory cognitive function for phonological and orthographic processing within the decoding process. Okay? So another example of what symbol imagery is like, and Tracy's going to work with me on this. Totally a nonsense word, right? So students going to have to put this through their orthographic mapping process and be able to think about this word both phonologically and orthographically. So I show this card to Tracy and I take it away. I'm actually going to ask you a different question first, Tracy. What did that word say?
Lisp.
Flisp. Great. What do you picture for the second letter in the word flisp?
L.
Nice job. If you erase the L and put an R there, what would it say now?
It now says frisp.
Frisp. Great. And what if you switch the last two letters around? What would it say?
Frips.
Frips. Nice job. Still picturing all those letters, Tracy?
I am.
Great. What are you picturing? What sound do you picture for your third letter?
I.
Great. What if you took away that I and you put an A there? What would the word say?
Fraps.
Fraps. Great. Now tell me what letters you picture for the word fraps.
Fraps.
Great. And so you'll notice what Tracy was doing through that process is the ability to hold on to and picture those letters in her mind because she's not looking at this word anymore. I'm asking her sometimes to change the letters, sometimes to change the sound, and she's able to come up with both of those changes, and those work together in order to help develop her phonological awareness or phonemic awareness, as well as her ability, her orthographic awareness, right? So that's what symbol imagery is. It's working on both of those areas. Whereas concept imagery is working on the whole. And so we're going to jump a little bit through concept imagery right now and focus in on decoding. Our goal in the program of Seeing Stars, of course, is to get our students to the end purpose of reading, which is reading comprehension. But obviously, instructionally, my students struggling with decoding, I can't just dive in and start working on reading comprehension. Instead, to focus on reading comprehension, first, my students got to be an accurate and fluent reader. In order to be an accurate and fluent reader in English, you have to have an enormous number of words that you can recognize very, very quickly. So you have to be very adept in terms of word recognition. Much of word recognition comes first, of course, from being able to sound out words and being able to start to map those sounds and letters together. So it comes from good word attack skills, right? In order to have good word attack skills, that sound symbol association needs to be very fast for students. They need to be able to track sounds and letters from vowel consonant, very simple patterns, on through complex syllabic patterns, single syllable patterns, on into multisyllabic words, and apply that over to their decoding and encoding. And that ability comes from having good phonemic awareness and symbol imagery. So initially, lessons in the Seeing Stars program are very heavily focused on word attack types of activities because that's the base that we have to provide our students. And we start to very quickly pace them from simple syllable words on into complex syllable words. And the further they get in that process, the more we can start to add word recognition, developing a student's sight word base into that practice, into those lesson plans. And the more that we develop their word recognition, the more time and lesson plans we can spend on focusing on accuracy and fluency of reading passages. And the more that we can do that, the more we can begin to address reading comprehension. And so the lesson plans that you'll see in the materials that we've submitted are very much about that same sort of scaffolding process that students are going through, beginning at the very beginning stages, heavily focused on word attack, and then moving deeper into accuracy and fluency and reading comprehension. The goal of all of this is to get our students to a point of independence. One of the unique characteristics of Lindamood-Bell's programs is how they go through. Teachers are trained to go through a very Socratic back and forth interaction with the student based on positive reinforcement that uses the student's error as a means to help them problem solve so that they can develop independence, right? And so if we take a very simple word like cat, and I said, say I showed a sentence to Tracy, and the sentence was, the cat ran up the tree. And Tracy made a mistake, and she said, the cut. Oftentimes, if instruction is content-based, a teacher might stop and say, no, that was the word cat. Instead, what we want to do is what Nancy Bell talks about is use that error as an opportunity for clarity. So instead, I'm going to respond to the response to Tracy, and I'm going to start with some positive reinforcement. Tracy, great job with your C saying k. When you say cut, because that's what she said, what do you picture for your second letter in the word cut?
Cut. I picture a U.
Great. That's excellent. So now I'm helping her monitor, hold on to what she did, and we're going to compare to the page in a moment. And I'm going to start, though, with some more positive reinforcement. Great job, Tracy. If there was a U there, that word would say cut. Now I can show Tracy the word again, and I can say, what do you see for your second letter here, Tracy?
That's an A, not a U.
Great. So with an A there, what would that word say? And I'm going to allow Tracy to self-correct.
Cat.
Cat. Nice job. And the more I go through that very explicit, very intentional process, the more I'm going to help my student become self-empowered to fix their own errors and become independent, right? All of that is based on that sort of Socratic back and forth that's deeply embedded in the program steps. So the critical components of Lindamood-Bell's programs and the Seeing Stars program in particular, it is systematic, explicit, and cumulative. We'll talk more about that. It's aligned to the science of reading, but it doesn't think about the science of reading as a series of checkboxes to mark off components. Instead, it's integrated, and we're going to talk about that. Really critically, Seeing Stars is aligned to a theory of cognition and how it is that the brain works. The programs develop the underlying processes necessary for reading. Seeing Stars is not scripted. And that's really critical. We do have a scope and sequence. We do have program steps. We do have lesson plans. We do have language that we want the teachers to use. However, we believe real differentiation doesn't exist if I'm saying this is what a teacher does at week 1, then this is what they do at week 2, and this is what you do at week 3, because not all students are going to learn in that same way at that same pace. So unless we empower our teachers to be able to differentiate and in real time respond to what they're seeing from their students and do real-time progress monitoring so that they can pace and change their lesson plans, they're not going to develop their students to a level of independence. And so Seeing Stars is designed to empower educators to really be critical thinkers as they're working with their students and respond to the student's response. And that occurs because of the sort of Socratic interaction that the programs are based on. Last thing to touch on before we jump into the materials, we do think about how it is these programs are applied to different tiers of intervention. This is a document that is uploaded in your handout materials. When we think about tier 3 intervention, we are talking about intensive intervention for students, so groups of 5 or fewer that are receiving instruction as close to 5 days a week, 60 minutes a day as we can get, because we know that in order to close gaps for students who are a standard deviation or more below the norm, they're going to need 80 to 120 hours of intervention. So how do we get there? We get there by getting as close in a school year as we can to an hour a day, 5 days a week to get to 80 to 120 hours. Tier 2 looks a little bit different, obviously. We're talking about 8 students or fewer, several times a week, 30 to 45 minutes of instruction. Right? There's my name again, and we're about to dive into the materials in just a moment. Okay, so now we'll dive into the different materials that you'll have access to for the Virginia Department of Ed review. You'll have access to the learning management system that Gander Publishing has put together. In here, you'll find all of the different Seeing Stars materials. These are materials that come in the kit and come along with the program. And separately uploaded to the submission is a scope and sequence of the Seeing Stars program that lays out in lots of detail exactly when it is that you're introducing different steps and how it is that you're overlapping these processes together. So that will be uploaded. And then something that will be very helpful to you, I think probably the most helpful to you, will be the handout document that you can take with you that has references the steps, obviously, and discussion of the goals of the steps in here. And then also crucially shows you an example of what the materials look like. So, and sort of overlaps what each of these steps in sequence will look like, and then gets to some lesson plans at the end that we'll dive into. So when you think about the LMS, if we come here, the first step, the first item in the lesson plan is to go through the letter imagery cards. And we have them broken into consonants and vowels here. And so if we take a look at the consonants, you can see what the set looks like. Here's what the box itself that comes in the kit looks like. And then you can dive in and kind of go through the order of what's introduced in row 1 here. Right? Important to recognize is that what the kit itself has is the letter cards with the letter on the front and specific instructions about what the teacher is supposed to do on the back. So it has a sound key and the dialogue that the teacher is supposed to be going through with the student. Okay? And so for the letter imagery step, what I'm doing is saying to the student, Tracy, I'm going to show you a card with a letter on it. After I take it away, I want you to write that letter in the air, saying the name of the letter and then the sound that goes with it. Right? If the student doesn't know the name of the letter, I'm providing it at that point. If they don't know the sound that the letter makes, I'm providing it at that point. So go ahead, Tracy, and take a look at that one. I'll take it away and go ahead and write it in the air for me.
A.
Great. What sound does it make?
Ah.
Ah, nice job. The letters are introduced in lowercase form because that matches the majority of the letters that students are going to be seeing in print. If my student, okay, so we've got vowels and we've got consonant cards. We've got sound keys for both of those. And they can be practiced in a number of different ways. So the ways of practicing it are referenced in here as well as in the submission, and they are in the chapter manual. So the teacher can be providing the sound, and I can say to Tracy, great, Tracy, what's the name of the letter that makes the sound B?
B. B.
B. Go ahead and write that letter up in the air for me.
B.
Great. And certainly if the student needs to, they can also be tracing their finger over that letter as they say the name of the letter and then provide the sound. But ultimately, we do want to move to making sure that we're doing some symbol imagery processing for that. So we're taking the letter away and the student's picturing it in their mind, because that's that orthographic mapping piece that we're trying to drive at. All right. So that is the letter imagery cards. The syllable cards are, if we've just introduced some letters, now my goal is to take those letters that we introduced and put them into practice by putting them into syllable patterns. And so box 1, you'll see how these are broken down into some of the boxes are simple syllables and then move up into complex syllables. On the side of the box is listed what the different contents for that box are and what sounds and combinations of letters are going to be practiced in these. These can be practiced at the vowel consonant, consonant vowel level. And they can also be practiced again at the, oops, let me back up. At the simple syllable level. So we can do short vowels and final E at that level. If my student's able to hold on to and picture more letters in their mind, we can move to practicing those same combinations and same orthographic expectancies at that level. The way that this is practiced is that I'll show a card to my student. And so again, on the front, I've got the card box and then the set, what's going to be practiced in here. On the back, I've got the instructions with the dialogue for what I'm supposed to be saying. Tracy, this time I'm going to show you a word. It might be a real word. It might be a nonsense word. After I show it to you, I'm going to hold it up about a second for each letter. I'll take it away. You go ahead and write the letters up in the air, saying the name of the letters as you write them, and then tell me what the whole word says. And then I might ask you some more questions about it. You ready?
Okay.
Great. Take a look at this one first. Take it away and go ahead and write those up in the air for me.
A. P.
Great. What does that word say?
App.
Excellent. What'd you picture for your first letter in app?
A.
Great. How about your second letter?
P.
Great. What sound did that P make?
P.
Excellent. Now I'm going to show you another card. And you'll notice initially that these cards are very much designed so that one sound or one letter is changing from one word to the next in order to really start to help build that student's ability to compare and contrast. Again, we talked about the importance of Socratic interaction with students. Choice and contrast is deeply embedded in everything that students are doing. And so when we get to teaching an expectancy such as final E, my teacher can go to box 2, set 6. So it's consonant, vowel, consonant. Says on the front, there's going to be short vowels and final E that's practiced in here. And even if my teacher is not thinking to say something like put an E at the end of that word, now erase the E, what does it say? We're going right through it. Sam to same to tame to tam to Tim to time, right? And as we're going through here, I'm saying to my student, great, Tracy, go ahead and write all those letters up in the air for me and tell me what it says.
S-A-M-E.
Great. What does that word
Same.
say? Nice
Same.
job. What are you picturing for your second letter in the word same?
A.
Is that A saying its name or sound?
Saying its name.
Its name. Yeah. What's making it say its name?
There's an E at the end and it jumps over and makes the A say its name.
Nice job. And if we erase the E, what would the word say now?
Sam.
Great. What do you picture for your second letter in Sam?
A.
Great. What sound is it making there? Is it saying its name or its sound?
Saying its sound.
Yeah, what sound? Nice job. You knew what question I was going to ask you. That's great. All right. So that's the type of interaction that we're going through with those syllable cards. Now, again, as the teacher and what's going to be designed explicitly in the lesson plans and what I should be thinking about in terms of when we talk about raising teachers' pedagogical skills is that whatever my teacher noticed the students having difficulty with in that letter imagery step, now I'm going to go to my syllable cards. I'm going to practice that some more, right? Because that's my opportunity to do so. So when we think about what a lesson plan looks like, so this is deeper into your handbook. On page 42 is a sample lesson plan number 1, right? Up at the top, we've got a goal for what it is that we're going to be teaching. It's explicit about what sounds we're going to be working on from their sound symbol chart, the exact activities that we're going to be doing and what we're going to be applying. Do set the climate, which is listed out in the manual for how you're going to do that, and then go into, you can see how much time we're going to spend on imaging and saying sounds and letters, referring to our sound and symbol chart for the organization of those letters, and using the letter imagery cards to go through that. If I've noticed, as I often do, that my students are having difficulty telling the difference between I and eh when I'm going through my letter imagery cards, I'm not expecting perfection at that point, right? I'm teaching the difference between I and eh. As a teacher, if I notice that, then the very next thing I'm going to do is go down to my syllable cards, and I'm going to make sure that we're finding syllable cards that are going to work on that difference between I and eh. And here's the thing. Even if I don't find one, I can show Tracy this card. I can take it away. Tracy, can you write those letters up in the air and tell me what it says?
O-B. Ob.
Nice job. When you say ob, what do you picture for your first letter?
O.
And O, great. What do you see for your, I agree, that would say ob. You're absolutely right. What do you see for your first letter here?
Ah, that's not a O, that's an A.
Great. So what would that word say?
That would say A-B, ab.
Ab, great. So now what I'll do is, thinking as a teacher, is I'll go right to that next word, which is A-T. I'll take it away. My student says at, and I'm going to say, great, now erase the first letter and change it to an O. Now, what does that word say? And I'm going right back to exactly where they made their mistake to help them ultimately by the end of that lesson achieve clarity. So we've talked about imaging sounds and letters, doing the syllable cards. The next step is to image and read with what's called the syllable board. Syllable board has 2 parts to it. It has a part with individual lines. It's called the single syllable side, and then it's got the other side, which we use for multi-syllabic words, in which the student's writing a syllable on each chunk and picturing it that way. So if we start this way, we're going to do this task in 2 different ways. Tracy, the first thing I'll do is tell you the individual letters to picture, and then you'll tell me back what the whole word says. So that's reading. And then I'm going to switch, and I'm going to tell Tracy the whole word and ask her to tell me the individual letters that she pictures, and that's spelling. So Tracy, let's start with this. How about A-T? What does that say?
At.
At. Nice job. Now let's change it from A-T to I-T. What does that say?
I-T. It.
It. And so she's reading those words back to me, right? Now, if I flip that task and turn it into a spelling task, I can say to Tracy, if that word says it, tell me the letters that you picture for ip.
Ip. I-P. Ip.
Great. And if that says ip, tell me the letters that you're picturing for op.
Op. O-P. Op.
Nice job, Tracy. And so again, we're going right to both reading that task and spelling that task. You can think about the syllable board as very similar to like an Elkanon box, except what the student's doing here is directly and explicitly mapping, because we're tapping into their ability to picture those letters in their mind. And I want to go right back to those same mistakes. So if we had, I think we ended with at, I'm not sure,
Op.
but I would op. Great. I would then go back and I would say, great. And now make it say app, because that was where she was having difficulty before, was between the A and the O. So I hit that again with my syllable board. And then we're going to go into imaging and reading with air writing, which is the same sort of process, but not using the board for my student to necessarily be anchored in the task. And then I'm going to go into, if I go back over to my lesson plan, the decoding step. And this is where I'm going to get my decoding workbook out. and my student will go through their decoding workbook. You all have access to these decoding workbooks in the LMS. So if we come here, we can take a look at what the decoding workbooks look like. If I go to workbook 2, I can see what's happening here. And at the top, I can see these are consonant, vowel, consonant words. There's short vowels. There's one change from one word to the next, and my student can begin to read down this list. And I can always cover over a word and ask the student what letters they're picturing for that. I'm, of course, responding to their response when they make an error by going through that same Socratic positive reinforcement activity that Tracy and I went through before. When you see these materials sorry, let me go back to that share screen. You see these materials in the handbook. You'll see, go to the single syllable ones. You'll see that there are lots of activities listed on here. So there's a reading section for them to do decoding. There's space for them to do spelling. There are sight words that should correspond roughly to where that student is if they're working on that level of complexity of words. Sentences for them to read, and then space for them to write sentences. And there are, at the beginning of each of these workbooks, explicit instructions on how it is that the teacher is going to be going through each of those different steps, and that will be laid out in the lesson plan as well. For when we get to introducing multi-syllable words, we use what's called the multi-syllable workbook. First part of that is to begin with just counting syllables, and the teacher is reading these words to the student, and the student's learning to clap these syllables out and discovering the idea that there's a relationship between the number of vowels and number of syllables, or number of vowel sounds and the number of syllables. Introducing some common endings or suffixes and beginning to work on picturing for those, and then being able to practice them in the same way that we did in the single syllable workbook. So that's what it looks like as we get into multi-syllable practice. Multi-syllable practice is done both with the workbook, the multi-syllable syllable cards, so those syllable card sets that we were looking at earlier, as well as the multi-syllable side of the syllable board. Did want to show you some additional materials that you'll have access to through the learning management system about the Seeing Stars program. You'll notice you'll have the Seeing Stars visual spelling chart down here. This shows how the Seeing Stars process explicitly gets applied over to a visual spelling chart. Again, this step is laid out in the Seeing Stars manual, but here's what the visual spelling chart itself looks like. I also wanted to point out that the Seeing Stars Catch a Stars workbooks are in here. These are where we take a look at sight words, what we call star words, and there's description of the overview and what the process is supposed to be. And then the words themselves are laid out. They are defined. There are sentences that use them. There's space for the student to trace the word, finger write the word, use the word in a sentence if that's appropriate for them at that point. Right? And so this goes through all of the different star words broken down in increments of 50. Also wanted to make sure that you understood that the Seeing Stars manual is here for you to take a look at. So if you click on Seeing Stars manual, that will take you to the manual itself, and you can then click through. So we were looking for a while at sample lesson plan 1 and talking about specifically what those steps were. As you can see down at the bottom, there's a next goal that's listed for what should be happening in terms of the next lesson plan. As students progress through, they'll get to a point at which they're going to be doing complex single syllable words, so up to 5 sounds at the single syllable level. And then they're also working on reading and spelling multi-syllable words, tying that over much more to their sight words and contextual reading. And there's a goal down at the bottom of that. At the end of this handbook, you have several other pieces that I think will be useful to you. You have the response to intervention model that we discussed earlier. You have as well a series of questions, FAQ questions talking about basic implementation pacing and lesson planning, research on the programs, and research on the importance of symbol imagery and orthographic mapping to the reading process.